London in 1666 was a city still recovering from catastrophe. Just a year earlier, the Great Plague had killed nearly 100,000 people, roughly a quarter of the city's population. The streets were slowly returning to life, businesses reopening, and Londoners trying to rebuild their lives. But the worst was yet to come. This would be the year that would reshape London forever. Thanks to advanced AI technology, we can now reconstruct this pivotal year with remarkable accuracy. By analyzing period paintings, engravings, and eyewitness accounts like Samuel Pepys' famous diary, we're able to visualize how London appeared in those fateful days of September 1666, capturing the architecture, streets, and atmosphere of a city about to be consumed by fire. This is Pudding Lane in early September 1666, a narrow street near London Bridge in the heart of the city. The buildings here were typical of medieval London. At number 3 Pudding Lane stood Thomas Farriner's bakery, where he held a contract with the Navy to produce ship's biscuit. It was here, in the early hours of September 2nd, that a spark from one of Farriner's ovens would ignite the most destructive fire in London's history. The bakery stored flammable materials like timber and fuel, and the surrounding warehouses held tar, rope, oil, and brandy. When the fire began around 1 a.m., Farriner and his family escaped through an upstairs window, but their maid, too frightened to follow, became the fire's first victim. Her name has been lost to history. This view shows London Bridge as the fire began to spread on that Sunday morning of September 2nd. Samuel Pepys was woken at 3 a.m. by his maid Jane, who had seen the flames from her window. At first, Pepys thought the fire was far enough away and went back to bed. By 7 o'clock, when he looked again, over 300 houses had already burned. The fire spread with terrifying speed from Pudding Lane toward Fish Street and the bridge. The previous summer had been unusually dry, leaving timber buildings like kindling. Strong easterly winds drove the flames westward through the city. Pepys walked to the Tower of London and climbed to a high vantage point, where he witnessed the horrifying scene. Houses at the end of the bridge ablaze, an infinite, great fire consuming everything in its path. Looking across the Thames, we see the fire's devastating progress on the first day. Pepys took a boat through London Bridge and saw a lamentable fire spreading faster than anyone could control. People weren't even attempting to fight the flames, only desperately trying to save their possessions by throwing them into the river or loading them onto boats. The Thames became crowded with vessels carrying household goods, with Pepys noting that nearly every boat seemed to contain someone's virginals. The river was London's highway, normally filled with commercial traffic, but on this day it became an escape route for tens of thousands of terrified Londoners. Pepys made his way to Whitehall Palace to report what he'd seen. King Charles II and the Duke of York were deeply concerned, and Pepys was called before them to describe the situation. He told them that unless houses were pulled down to create fire breaks, nothing could stop the fire. The king immediately sent Pepys with orders to the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, commanding him to spare no houses and pull down everything in the fire's path. When Pepys found Bloodworth in Cannon Street, the Lord Mayor was exhausted, with a handkerchief around his neck, and cried out like a fainting woman, "Lord, what can I do? I am spent. People will not obey me. I have been pulling down houses, but the fire overtakes us faster than we can do it." Bloodworth had actually been called to the fire's origin hours earlier, but had dismissed it, reportedly saying, "A woman could piss it out." His failure to act decisively in those crucial early hours sealed London's fate. This is St Paul's Cathedral, as it appeared before the fire reached it. The medieval cathedral, already over 500 years old, had lost its spire in 1561 and had fallen into disrepair. By September 1666, wooden scaffolding surrounded parts of the building as restoration work was underway. On Tuesday, September 4th, the third day of the fire, the flames reached St Paul's. Eyewitness John Evelyn described how the stones of St Paul's flew like grenades, the lead melting down the streets in a stream. The intense heat was so great that the very stones exploded. The lead roof melted and ran in rivers through the streets, while the wooden scaffolding acted as fuel, ensuring the cathedral's complete destruction. What had been the spiritual heart of London for centuries was reduced to a smoking ruin in a matter of hours. Looking westward along Cheapside during the height of the fire, we see London's main commercial street consumed by flames. This broad avenue, lined with the city's most expensive shops and businesses, was where merchants had built their fortunes for generations. The steeple of Street Mary Le Beau, with its famous bells that defined a true Cockney, caught fire and eventually collapsed. Pepys walked along these streets and saw them filled with people fleeing, laden with goods to save, and even sick people being carried away in their beds. The streets were clogged with carts and horses, people running over one another in their desperation to escape. Churches, normally places of worship, were filled instead with people's possessions, as Londoners sought any refuge from the advancing flames. By Tuesday evening, September 4th, Pepys took his wife, Elizabeth, and friends onto the Thames to witness what he would describe as the most horrifying sight. As darkness fell, the fire became even more visible and terrifying. From an alehouse on Bankside in Southwark, they watched as the flames created what Pepys called a most horrid, malicious, bloody flame, not like the fine flame of an ordinary fire. Houses were ignited by these sparks, falling 3, 4, even 6 buildings away from the main fire. The sound was apocalyptic, a horrid noise the flames made, and the cracking of houses at their ruins. That same evening, Pepys returned home to Seething Lane to find everyone discoursing and lamenting the fire. His colleague Tom Hayter arrived with a few goods saved from his house on Fish Street Hill, which had burned. The fire was now so close that Pepys and his household began packing their own possessions. By moonlight, they carried goods into the garden. Pepys buried his wine and Parmesan cheese in a pit in the garden, along with important office papers. He moved his money and iron chests into the cellar and got his bags of gold ready to carry away. The fear was so great that Sir William Batten had already sent for carts from the countryside to remove his goods. All through that night, the Pepys household worked frantically, with little rest, taking down goods and preparing to flee if necessary. On the third day, soldiers were deployed throughout the city to help pull down houses and fight the flames. King Charles II himself rode through the burning streets, giving out money to encourage people to keep fighting. The Duke of York commanded firefighting operations in different parts of the city. Gunpowder was now being used to demolish buildings more quickly and create wider fire breaks. But it was nature, not human effort, that ultimately saved what remained of London. The strong easterly wind that had driven the fire westward for 3 days finally began to weaken on Wednesday evening. By Thursday, September 6th, the fire was finally under control. When the flames died down, the scale of destruction was almost incomprehensible. The fire had consumed approximately 436 acres within the city walls, destroying 13,200 houses and leaving around 100,000 people homeless. 87 churches were destroyed, including St. Paul's Cathedral. The Royal Exchange, Guildhall, and 44 livery company halls were reduced to ashes. Entire streets had vanished. The Customs House, where England's trade was recorded, was gone. Remarkably, fewer than 10 deaths were officially recorded, though the true number was likely higher, particularly among the poor whose deaths went unrecorded. In the aftermath, blame spread as quickly as the fire had. England was at war with France and the Netherlands, and many suspected foreign enemies of deliberately starting the fire. Catholics were particularly suspected, as London was a Protestant city and anti-Catholic sentiment ran high. A Frenchman named Robert Hubert confessed to starting the fire and was executed in October 1666, but it was later proven he wasn't even in London when the fire began. A parliamentary inquiry eventually concluded the fire was accidental, but suspicion and conspiracy theories persisted for years. Within days of the fire's end, plans were being drawn up to rebuild London. Christopher Wren, John Evelyn, and Robert Hooke all submitted grand designs for a new city with wide boulevards and classical architecture modeled on Paris or Rome. However, these ambitious plans were never realized. The complexity of property ownership and the desperate need for people to return to their lives and livelihoods meant London was largely rebuilt on its old street plan. But important changes were made. New building regulations, drafted with input from Wren and enacted in the Rebuilding Acts of 1667 and 1670, required that houses be built of brick or stone rather than timber. Streets were slightly widened. Overhanging upper floors were banned to prevent fire from jumping between buildings. His masterpiece, the new street, Paul's Cathedral, with its iconic dome, took 36 years to complete, finally finished in 1710. In 1677, the monument to the Great Fire was erected near Pudding Lane, designed by Wren and Robert Hooke. Standing 202 feet tall, exactly the distance from its base to where the fire began, it remains a permanent reminder of those terrible days in September 1666.